there, welcome to another show. This time I'm going to do another They Needed as a Failure. I'm going to talk about Hiruko The Goblin, which is a Shinya Tsukamoto film. I'll probably butcher his name, because I've heard it pronounced different ways, and I'm sure the way I'm pronouncing it is wrong, but that's one way I know how to pronounce it, with these horrible Scottish lips that can get around so many words. So yeah, Hiruko The Goblin was a film that was made and hasn't really been seen that much. Third Window has done a very nice release. They've got a 30-minute interview with Tsukamoto. There's a 10-minute commentary. There's an old document. There's an old interview as well, and look at special effects. So there's a lot of nice stuff in this package. The film itself is one of those ones. It's like once you've seen it, it's like, yeah, I can see why that was not brought up compared to some of his other films. Hiruko The Goblin was made just after the first Tetsuo film, just before the second one, and it was a studio film. It was his attempt to try a studio film, see how it felt for him. And in the interview, he's very positive with the experience, even though after this he went back to doing his way of doing films. So, I mean, one thing you see with Tsukamoto during interviews is he's a very polite, very nice man. He's a reputation as being a very nice man, you know, which is, he's so gentle compared to the films he makes. It's really weird. It's almost like his films are his psyche, and generally he's very polite. You know, it's that kind of feeling of that kind of artist who's very different from what you'd expect. Kind of like David Cronenberg really is, who feels very different from the films he makes, but it's just like he's just very civilized. And they both have a lot of interest in the body and existence within the body. But this is a studio film, and you can see there's issues here. There's issues that this is obviously a film that was needed for him, because you can see a lot of stuff that's going to come across later. Not even that much later, but his style didn't go down this path. There was just a sense that he found other stuff that was interested him, and it was what he did do is just take what he learned from experience. And from the sounds of it, a lot of what he got was working with technicians who were very good at their jobs, who were very experienced, and he learned a lot about practical filmmaking, the rules of filmmaking. Like if you look at the collection of films he's made, like some of his early short films and the first Tetsuo, he was welding all over the place. It wasn't very traditional. It was a mix of animated stuff and live action, and a lot of the camera placement was like sort of like Sam Raimi in the 80s was wonderfully amateurish at times, but very inventive. It was a very talented person doing what they could, but handling uncertain, respectable techniques. In this film, he learned a lot of respectable techniques, which would infuse into his other films. But for me, the film itself isn't that interesting. It's probably my least favourite Tsukamoto film by a mile. And I'm including Iron Man, the Tetsuo 3, which is not well regarded, which I really like. This one, it just feels like it's a 40-minute film in the body of an hour and a half. It just feels like there's so much padding. And there's another like 20 minutes beyond that 40 minutes that is nice stuff. It's not needed, but it's nice. But there's a good 20-25 minutes of this film that just feels like you're expanding stuff that isn't that interesting, that doesn't feel relevant to the plot. And the plot itself is so basic. It's like in a kind of early Tsukamoto film, the plot of this one and Tetsuo would have taken like 10 minutes. This is not that much there in plot. It is just a movie about a curse. You find it with the curse location as you go there when you deal with it. And it's very basic. It is very much influenced by Evil Dead. It's almost like they've said, look, do an Evil Dead for us. Because you can do that weird Sam Raimi type camera stuff. That's what it feels like. Just do this thing for us. And so he can do this American style movie. Which is good, because he can do all that stuff, and a lot of the best stuff in it is where he's having fun. Like he's doing weird camera shots, a very kind of rammy animation, they're flying down halls, and you have these people who are hunting the goblins, and they're using very DIY material, and the chief hunter is a bit insane because he lost his wife years ago, and he's nuts. And the boy is the young man he's working with, who's looking for his father, isn't that brave either, but he's trying his best. And they're a good combination. It's like, well, you had the characters, you had the atmosphere, you just didn't have the plot. The plot just feels like, well, this one location, or your two locations, you're going to try and do a lot within that location, and that's it. That's all you've got. And that's not enough for 90 minutes. It just feels like it just sort of start, stop, and it's like every so often has to stop and have some things they don't really need just to get it to 90 minutes. It's like we have to hit 90 minutes. So the film starts, gets some momentum going, then has to stop, or has to extend something well beyond its limit. So even sometimes you get some action, it's like, we don't need this. You can run in circles. You're going through the same routine you were going through 10 minutes ago, and there's nothing new here, and I'm getting a bit bored. And that's the big thing with this film is, you're entertained, but you're also kind of quietly bored by some of it, because it's like, there's no plot progression a lot of the time. It's just the same gag again and again and again. And it's like, I've seen it. It's just like one of those things, it's like sure, try to be a hack, and he can't pull it off, he's too interesting. He's had too many ideas, and whenever he gets something he's really attached to, you can see it because it generally raises the level of the film up above. And it makes everything else that's just okay feel really mediocre. Which is my big problem with the film is, like, there's nothing bad in this film. It's just that the highs are so high that the lows just become like, ugh. It's got that feeling of you expect more from the director, and he's just doing a job for the money, and that's it. That's the film. I mean, it's one of those things is that he can't not sell out. He can't really sell out in a way that is boring, but his personality makes the good stuff too good for the film. And it just becomes as a weird thing. Like, it's like there's lots of wonderful moments that like the young man's in love with his girl from his class, and he never had a chance to talk to her. Now she's a demon, and that kind of romantic longing is there throughout. And she comes back as a singing demon that gets people to drop their guard before she kills them, and all that stuff's done wonderfully. And it's like, but it's so much better than the rest of the film. There's lots of stuff like there's lots of decapitations where she managed to sing to these people a siren to get them to kill themselves. And there's all these shots of these heads coming off and all the rest of it. And it's wonderful. It's really over the top and wonderful and gory. Exactly what you're hoping for. But then the film then stops and has some dialogue scenes which don't mean much, or they run around a lot. And there's a whole section where they're running around getting chased by somebody. It turns out that they're both the same side. And it's like, well, I can see why you did it, but it's not very interesting, and it's well below the standard of the rest of the film. And there's stuff that happens all the time in this film, and there's just a lot of stuff where there's shots that go on for too long, and a lot of establishing shots that are there that you don't really need, but they're there, but they slow the pace down, so you're like, come on, get on with it, and they're not. And it's like, oh, come on. And then when they do that, then suddenly jump into a scene where Tsukamoto's full on, and suddenly I'm excited again, and then it stops and pulls you back to just this stuff again. It's just this boring thing. And that's just the problem with the film. It's just like start, stop, and it's like the thing about Tsukamoto is, if you follow his films after this, they're very short. He cuts it to the bone and he gets rid of all the garbage. He's brutal with himself as a director, which is one of the great things, is he's into the experience of the people that he's following, and he's not going to have lots of nonsense there that's going to bore you. That's the film, all the nonsense is there. It's like all the stuff that the studio wants in, that he would take out generally in the films that he controls. And that's the big thing, is he needed not to be in a studio. You know, with those kind of compromises. And I think that's the big thing about him getting money, is Tsukamoto makes Tsukamoto films. You either love him or hate them, but he makes Tsukamoto films. He's very polite about why he hasn't worked with studios after this. But I'm not sure it's the full story. I think he just likes control, and my feeling is he knows from this experience of that this film, he probably knows this film's too long. Like, doesn't really, the length is a detriment to the film. I mean, it could, if it was 70 minutes even, and he'd had some of that padding, the stuff that you don't really need, but that's a nice little character touch, it would have worked. But the 90 minutes, just the 20 minutes that are just spread out throughout, and to me, it just kills the film. But the thing is, after this, he learned to control his own projects after this. Because this film, Hiruko, did not do well. It was a disappointment. And it took years to actually get seen. And it was a Toho film, but they weren't very pleased with it. And it was just one of those films, it was like, obviously, they didn't have enough. They gave him the money, but they didn't give him the script that he really needed to actually make it work. And you just see it's a weird, bad match. Because as soon as he finished this, he went on to Tetsuo 2. Then he went into Bullet Boy and all these other great films he was making in the 90s that were much more naturalistic and less supernatural. Where you can see a lot of the stuff that came from here that would go into that, but it would do it in a much more intense fashion. It was much more psychological and intimate. So he learned a lot of the rules in this film that he needed for like traditional filmmaking that he could invert to use for his own style, which is much more into the kind of psychology, and it's almost that the films themselves are almost like the extension of psychology, the way they've been shaped within the shots, which you don't get here. And even here, the characters are not as interesting as any of his other characters. They're just kind of blanded out a little bit, and even the more interesting characters aren't that interesting ultimately. They're just genre pieces that he manages to infuse with some interesting stuff, but they're not very deep. But he would come back and do a lot of characters that have a lot more depth to them, that the plots and the kind of subtext all kind of came together a lot better, because it was like, it took away all the nonsense and it focused on what the themes were, what the characters were, what the story was, and everything else can get thrown out. So that's why he needed this failure. Like, he said basically there was another side to him that was much more traditional in these interviews. But because this film didn't do well and Tetsuo did, he went with that style. He was like, oh, thank God, because that's a much better style. And basically the traditional stuff that was in him came out through that style and could be interpreted in a more interesting way when you get to stuff like Files on the Plane or Kotoko or something, which are more traditional stories, but are done with his very intimate style. That actually means that he took what he could from this film and the more traditional elements of society that studio filmmaking had, but he managed to do it his own way. Now, you probably noticed I haven't heard of the plot much, because there's not really much of a plot. It's an Evil Dead rip-off. Apparently it's a yokai movie turned into a goblin movie, and it's just a traditional thing about old supernatural myths that come back to haunt people. It's just a excuse for some action. That's it. Or some running around a school thing. Bizarrely, it reminded me a lot of Demonic, that new Neil Blomkamp film, which also had a lot of running around a school area, a possessed school area where people died. It's eerily similar. This one's eerily as flawed as Demonic. It's just like these two films that are made by these big auteurs that are trying to be traditional horror films, but don't quite work because the people making them are a bit too weird and interesting for that genre. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this. I still hope you watch the film. It is an interesting film. It's one of those films that it's not anywhere near the peak. It's probably way in the low end of his career, but there's still interesting stuff because he's such a good director. Because his averages, like his lower films tend to be like the 45 category, and this is a 3 out of 5. But most of them are really, really well above that. So it's like it's an interesting film to see where he could have gone, but thankfully went in the much more interesting direction he did go in. You know, so I'll see you later. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye for now.